I am originally from Louisville, Kentucky. That's right, that's how you say it, Louisville, right? Not Louisville, not Louisville, but Louisville, Kentucky. And I grew up listening to there were only 3 special things about Louisville as a kid in the 80s, late 80s growing up. 3 things that we knew made Louisville special. Louisville Slugger bats, okay, any baseball players out there? The Churchill Downs, the Derby, the Kentucky Derby, and the greats. Muhammad Ali. I grew up hearing stories about Cassius Clay. And my grandfather was this poor, blue-collar, working-class man who grew up with a ton of grit and resilience. And my dad would tell me stories about coming home late and finding my grandfather with his black and white TV with the rabbit ears and the turn knob, and he would just be hooked on watching Cassius Clay fight. My grandfather was this humble but really strong man, and something about Muhammad Ali's wit, about some of those lines that he would say just kind of pulled my grandfather in, how quick he was, how agile how powerful his punches landed. And he would say things like, Muhammad Ali would say things like, "I'm so fast that last night I turned off the light switch in my hotel room and I was in bed before the room got dark." He'd say things like, "I'm a bad man." "I'm the greatest in the world," right? Have you heard this? Or, "I float like a butterfly and I sting like a bee." And I grew up reading and learning in grade school about Muhammad Ali because we shared the same hometown. And as I've studied his life and as I've learned more about his life, I've just been struck by the reality that behind the iconic greatness and wit and power and strength and even persona of Muhammad Ali, there was always someone or some someones in his corner. He was introduced to boxing in 1954 by a Louisville police officer named Joe Martin. He had his bike stolen and was really angry, and this mentor in his life pointed him in the right direction. Don't take revenge or resentment. Take it out on complete strangers in the boxing ring, right? He had men like Angelo Dundee, Howard Bingham, Ferdy Pacheco, and Drew Bandini. And Drew Bandini, who is actually the man who coined the phrase, "We're going to float like a butterfly and sting like a bee," that became so iconic to Muhammad Ali. And I was reading about all these people and Cassius Clay's upbringing and all of his life, and you start to realize that almost every iconic figure has had someone in their corner. Almost every boxer needs a cut man. Almost every boxer needs a trainer. Almost every iconic fighter needs a friend, someone, a hype man to speak for him. And every iconic figure, whether political, celebrity, athletic, has some people in their life that made them who they are. And yet many of us today, culturally, feel kind of stuck. I don't know if you felt like this sense of I'm trying to navigate life and decisions. I'm trying to fight my way through all this faith and grief and loss and my calling and my identity and my purpose and who I'm becoming. I feel like I'm navigating it all alone. Not with somebody necessarily in my corner, but alone. See, Moses was there. We've been journeying through Moses' life in the book of Exodus, and we've looked at this reality that Moses has made some mistakes in his life. He's made some decisions in his life that have kind of left him as an outcast, feeling a foreigner in a foreign land, and he's run into the desert, and yet God has pursued him and has called him by name. He said, "Here I am," and then he said, "Who am I?" And he's wrestled with insecurity and fear and doubt. God has put this call on his life, and Moses is standing in the face to face with God. And then he says this, "Pardon me, God. Pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else." He says, "Please send somebody else. It's not me, God. I don't know if I have what it takes to do this thing." And I've always read that please send someone else instead of me. But maybe he was saying, please send somebody else to be with me. Please, God, send somebody else. Have somebody else do this or send somebody else to be with me. And it makes me curious, just curious, about the role that loneliness potentially played in Moses' life and faith and struggle and belief in himself and his belief in God and the ability to even change his circumstances. What role did loneliness have in Moses' life. We've talked about it often here about this loneliness epidemic that Vivek Murthy, the U.S. Surgeon General, has come out. Our government is concerned about it. Loneliness in America is at pandemic levels. A 2018 study shared that 30% of Americans suffer from loneliness. That's in 2018, that's pre-pandemic. And 60% struggle to feel like there is someone in their life that knows them well at all. 6 out of 10. There's nobody in my life that knows me. The APA has come out and shared loneliness has been found to raise levels of stress, impede sleep, and in turn, harm our physical body. Loneliness can also augment depression or anxiety. Now, Moses knew silence and solitude. He ran from Egypt because Pharaoh was after him to kill him, and because his own people, the Hebrew people, had mocked and excluded and ostracized him. So Moses runs into the desert, and for 40 years, he wanders. He has tons of time and space for silence and solitude. Silence and solitude is important to our life. We need some time and space out of the noise-polluted world that you and I live in, of distraction and opinions and pressures. And I'm sure silence and solitude, those spiritual practices, actually became a friend of Moses where he was formed. But I wonder how Moses' loneliness just kind of paralyzed him, froze him. Those two are different. Silence and solitude is different than feeling completely and utterly alone. And so in Exodus 4, we see this moment where God's ushered his power and his presence and all these promises in front of Moses, and yet there's this fear. There's insecurity and possibly a sense of loneliness that's distorting Moses' ability to even hear God's voice and what God wants to do in his life. So we read on. In Exodus chapter 4, verse 14, it says, "Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses." Moses has said, "Please send somebody else. Please send anybody else." And then the Lord's anger burned against Moses. Moses said, "Not me." Maybe he's lonely or lazy or unbelieving or stubborn or all of the above or lonely, but God is angry with Moses. Does God get angry? Yeah. God gets angry. It's okay. It's okay that God gets angry. The word for anger here is this Hebrew word, af. A with a P with a little thing over it. And it means kind of nostril, nose, face, or anger. Have you ever seen, I've never seen a real bull like kind of scrunch up their nostrils and blow air out of their nose and steam comes out of their ears, but I've seen cartoons like that. Or like a horse on a cool morning at Churchill Downs in Louisville, Kentucky, where they're blowing air out of their nostrils. Or my dog named Moose. If anybody comes to the door, right, he curls up his nose and he goes, right? And he puts on a big front. But when you open the door, he rolls over and it's really disappointing. But that word af, right, exudes this blowing of the nostrils, this sense of exasperation. Have you ever been in a meeting with somebody where you're just like, where you're frustrated, you're exasperated? That's the word. And God is af towards Moses. He's frustrated. He's angry. Why? What makes God angry? N.T. Wright writes, God's anger against evil is itself the determination to put things right, to get rid of the corrupt attitudes and behaviors that have spoiled his world and his human creatures. I'm going to read that again. God's anger against evil is itself his determination to put everything that's wrong into what's right, to get rid of corruption and evil behaviors that have spoiled the world and our human hearts. I like that. God's anger is just. It is good. Does God get angry? Yes. Because he is determined to make things right, to right a wrong. And God's anger comes up against evil. There is good and there is evil. There are corrupt attitudes. There are evil behaviors that spoil our hearts and minds and the world. And so God can get angry, but we have to remember that God is love. God can get angry, but God is love, and both are definitely true and can be true at the same time. Psalm 103, verse 8, the psalmist writes, "The Lord is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in love." He has all kinds of love within him because John writes that God is love. Love came from God. Love is God. He can get angry to right or wrong, but he is love, abounding in love. He's slow to anger. But God gets angry with Moses. With Moses. Why? Maybe because of Moses' stubbornness. Maybe because of Moses' disbelief. He said remember, there's this back and forth in Moses' conversation with God where God is like, hey, I am sending you to go rescue an entire people who are held by the grips of slavery and oppression. And Moses says, nah, send somebody else. And he's like, yeah, but I will be with you, Moses. Here's my promise. Look at my presence. I'm holy. I'm eternal. I'm glorified. I'm bigger than anything. Trust me. I don't know if you're big enough. Like Moses has this back and forth where he's just riddled with maybe some disbelief. Maybe Moses has a corrupted view of God, that God can't, God won't fulfill his word. Maybe he's believing that God is not with him. Or maybe he's chosen a distorted view of himself. Maybe because Moses is sitting in the depths of his own despair where he is, of his loneliness, just going like, I don't want to get out. I'm kind of comfortable here in the depths of my feelings. And maybe, and most probably, God's frustrated with Moses because of his disobedience. God has said, do this thing. I am sending you. And Moses says, no, send someone else. This makes God angry. His anger burns towards Moses. But notice what God does in his anger. What do you do in your anger? Notice what God does in his anger. The Lord said, what about your brother Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. He is already on his way to meet you, and he will be glad to see you. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I will help both of you speak and will teach you what to do. Aaron will come and he will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if he were your mouth and as if you were God to him. Now, really quickly, like he's not saying, Moses, you're God. It's like God is saying, I'm going to speak to you, Moses. You're going to tell Aaron what to say, and you're going to be the relaying point of like a messenger, a prophet to Aaron so that he can speak on my behalf. Moses is not God. We know this. But take this staff in your hand so you can perform the signs with it. Then Moses went back to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to Jethro, let me return to my own people in Egypt to see if any of them are still alive. And Jethro said, go, and I wish you well. So I want us to get this. Moses has said, please send somebody else. I don't want to do this. Send somebody else either to help or just send somebody else altogether. And God gets angry and frustrated with Moses. And in God's anger, what does he do? He sent help. This is who God is. Slow to anger, abounding in love, the one who does not leave you alone, lonely, dejected, disbelieving. But in God's frustration and determination to make things right, he sends help. He sends help to Moses by putting people in Moses' life. God sends some someones. God sends some someones to come alongside Moses in his struggle with identity, in his struggle with insecurity, in his struggle with purpose and meaning. And he says, hey, Aaron, your brother. You know Aaron, your brother. Like he's coming to you right now and he's on the way and Jethro is down the hill. There are some someones that I am sending to you to help you with who you are, with where you're at, and with where you're going, with who I'm calling you to be, some someones. Do you know in the pain of having no one in your life? You know, maybe I've talked to some folks who have come to SLO City and they've said, you know, like I've tried church before, but I just feel like I walk in the door and nobody notices me. Maybe you're in this room and you came in here by yourself and you sat here and you were like, I'm in a crowded room, but I feel like no one saw me, no one talked. I pray to the Lord above that you run into some people this morning that see you. I want to be a church where no one can step into this door feeling like there is no one in their life. Because that is painful. But do you know the power of having someone? Power of how even some someones in your life that come alongside you? Today, I just want to look at Moses' journey, and I want to look at Moses, and God, I want to look at God's plan for Moses to bring some someones around him to meet him in his loneliness and to help him to become who God's called him to be, so that you and I can maybe take some courage, be challenged with this. God sends someone else's. In verse 18, it says, Moses went back to Jethro, his father-in-law. He goes down the hill to Jethro, and he says, let me return to my own people in Egypt to see if any of them are still alive. And then Jethro said, go, I wish you well. Moses has a someone who's already in his life to speak wisdom and blessing. And God says, I'm going to call you to this. And so what does Moses do? He goes to the someone in his life who is full of wisdom and full of blessing. Jethro was older than Moses, and when Moses ran away from Egypt, he came to the land of Midian, and he settled down by a well. And at this well, there were some young ladies. And these young women were daughters of Jethro. Now, I don't know which came first. I don't know if the well came first or if he saw a group of young women there. So he's like, I might just hang out by this well with all these young women. I'm alone, right? But anyways, he's there, and this group of travelers comes up, and they start harassing these young women. And the scriptures tell us that Moses comes to their defense. He contends for them. He pushes away the travelers, and they say, Moses rescued us. And so Jethro welcomes him to his home, and Moses ends up marrying one of Jethro's daughters. And Jethro becomes a person of respect, a person of maturity, a person of wisdom and high standing in Moses' life. Someone that he looked up to, and someone that he clearly respects as an authority figure. Do you have a wiser, older, mature voice in your life that you go to for advice, regardless of your age? Do you have somebody in your life that you go to? I remember wrestling through the decision to move our family to the Central Coast, and I walked into the office of my Jethro. And I sat down and I said, here's what I'm sensing. I feel like a crazy person. What do you think? I don't know if this is right or wrong or indifferent, or if this is God, if this is me, if this is, something I ate last night. And he just sat with me, and he waded through those waters with me, and he gave me wisdom and advice and belief and ultimately blessing. See, having someone of standing, of stature, of respect and maturity in your life is so important, because life is hard. Life is difficult. There are losses that you encounter. There are wins that you need to figure out. There are ways of viewing the world. There are ways of interacting that you've just never gone through it before. You've never gone through it. And you need somebody older and wiser for you to help you learn how to balance a checkbook, and how to get a job, and how to raise a family, and how to think about yourself and grow in confidence, and how to handle all of the pulls and pressures of the culture around us. We need people of wisdom to help us, because as Socrates once said, the only true thing about us, the only true wisdom is in knowing that you absolutely know nothing. The only true wisdom is in knowing that you know nothing. And so we have to find wiser, older people. The writer of Proverbs says of this, the way of the fool says, I'm right in my own eyes. But a wise man is he who listens to wise counsel. Proverbs 19:20 says, listen to the counsel and accept discipline, that you may be wise the rest of your days. And God has provided wise counsel for Moses in someone to speak wisdom to him. And also blessing. What does Jethro say? He kind of goes to Jethro and says, do I have permission to go back to Egypt? It tells you something about their relationship. Maybe Moses worked for Jethro in the fields with all of his land. And Jethro meets him and he says, go, I wish you well. Go in peace. Did that hurt Jethro? Probably. Yeah. Is he worried for him? Absolutely. But he says, go in peace. Go and be blessed. Go, I believe in you. And that word of courage and affirmation, if you've received something like that, there is nothing like it. We need someone in our lives to speak wisdom and blessing. Who is that in your life? Are you in a place of being able to share wisdom and blessing with others? Will you withhold that blessing or give that blessing? Will you withhold that wisdom or share that wisdom? Moses said, send someone else. And there's someone already around him that he needs, Jethro. And there's also someone that the Lord is calling to come alongside of him. So he says, send someone else. So the Lord sent Aaron. God said, Moses, what about your brother? He's on the way, and he'll be someone to share the load. Someone for wisdom and blessing, and someone to share the load. Exodus 4, verse 27 and following says this, "Now the Lord said to Aaron," the Lord called Aaron, "Go out into the wilderness to meet Moses." So Aaron went. There wasn't a back and forth. Notice, it wasn't like, nah, I'll find somebody else, God. Aaron's like, okay. He's pretty obedient, listening, faithful. So Aaron went and met Moses on the mountain of God, and he gave him a big hug. Moses then told Aaron everything that God had commanded him to say, and he told him about the miraculous signs that the Lord had commanded him to perform. Then Moses and Aaron returned to Egypt and called all of the elders of Israel together who were under the weight of oppression in Egypt. Aaron told them everything that God had told Moses, and Moses performed the signs as they watched. Then the people of Israel were convinced that the Lord had sent Moses and Aaron, and when they heard that the Lord was concerned, remember that word from last week, about them, and had seen their misery, they bowed down and worshiped God. Moses has this high calling on his life to be a part of something bigger than him, something incredible, but his insecurity was so real. His sense of, I can't do this, was so real. This loneliness possibly left him unbelieving, and then God sends some someones into his life, a Jethro, and then calls Aaron to be somebody to share the load, share the responsibility, share the weight and the calling and the leadership that was put on Moses. And this is fascinating to me. I was reading through the book of Exodus, and this might be just a challenge. Like, how many times in the book of Exodus does it say Moses and Aaron or Aaron and Moses in the same verse? It's absurd. It's ridiculous. See, Moses modernly, like our modern telling of the story of Moses, Moses gets all the credit. Moses gets Charlton Heston. Moses gets like a Disney movie, like The Prince of Egypt. Like Moses gets all this stuff, and Aaron's in it. But every verse is like Moses and Aaron, Aaron and Moses, Moses and Aaron, Aaron and Moses. Look at this in Exodus chapter 5. It says, Moses and Aaron went to speak to Pharaoh first. Not just Moses, Moses and Aaron. They said, this is what God says. In verse 3, Aaron and Moses persisted. The God of the Hebrews has met with us. Exodus 6, verse 13. Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron. Exodus 7, then the Lord said to Moses, say everything I command you, and your brother Aaron is to tell Pharaoh to let the Israelites out of the country. Again, after he's already said no. Exodus 7, is this getting redundant? Moses and Aaron did as the Lord commanded them, collectively. And then something fun. Moses was 80, and Aaron was 83 years old when they spoke to Pharaoh. That's crazy. There is this camaraderie that we see in Moses and Aaron. Moses is stepping into who he is, but he needed an Aaron. God called an Aaron to come alongside Moses, and they did this thing together. There was a sharing of the load, and there is something powerful when you find someone that shares the load and someone who is just with you. Someone that is with you in the highs, in the lows, in the difficulty, in the times of doubt, in the times where you tried the thing and it didn't work, in the times where you're praying for frogs to come out of the river and they actually came, in the times where you're celebrating, in the times where you felt overwhelmed, and the times where you approached the Israelites who had already mocked you and told you that you weren't a part of them. Remember, Aaron was with Moses. Do you remember the part in Exodus chapter 4 where Moses says, God, I don't talk well. Exodus 4, verse 10, I don't talk well, God. I've never been good with words, neither before nor after you spoke to me. I stutter and I stammer. So what does God do? He provides a friend to speak on his behalf, someone that was with him, someone that was together, someone that was speaking up. And together they set a nation free, together sharing the load. God also sends someone that strengthens faith. You and I need someone to share the load in our life, bear our burdens, navigate life, and you also need somebody in your life that strengthens faith. We got enough people in our life that cause us to doubt ourselves, cause us to doubt God, cause us to question everything around us. We got enough of that. Do you have someone in your life that strengthens you in faith? That speaks belief and trust and confidence in the character of God? I love the story of Moses and Aaron and a guy named Hur, H-U-R, okay? The nation of Israel is finally free of Egypt. They're out on their way to the promised land. It's going to be a long time, but they're on their way. And there are other enemies that come up against them. The Amalekites have attacked this whole nation. Moses is leading, Aaron's supporting, and there's this interesting thing that happens in Exodus chapter 17. It says Joshua fought the Amalekites as Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of the hill together. As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning. But whenever he lowered his hands, because he had the staff of God in his hand, the Amalekites were winning. Something weird and supernatural and also really practical is happening here. When Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone. They put it under Moses and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur then held up his hands, one on one side and one on the other, so that Moses' hands remained steady till sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekite army. Lots of things happening here, but this is just a powerful picture. Moses is this leader of the nation, and he's raising his hands, he's raising the staff of God, and it's increasing the faith of all the nation as they're fighting this great enemy. And as long as Moses held his hands up, they were winning, but his hands started to grow tired. So he needed someone's in his life to restore strength to his hands, restore strength to his faith, someone to come alongside him when he was weary and tired, to actually support him, to lift him up, to say, Moses, you're not alone. Don't grow discouraged. Don't grow weary. Don't grow tired. Someone to lift him up and pick him up. Aaron was that someone. And Hur was that other someone that shared the load, that was with him, someone that strengthened faith. See, God gives us other people to help us find a way, to pick us up, to speak up for us, to support us and listen to us and then strengthen us and say, don't lose faith. Keep your hands up. Keep worshiping. Keep praising. Keep trusting God. Keep the power of God. Don't give in. This is all throughout the New Testament. Paul wrote in Galatians chapter 6, carry one another's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. In Philippians, he says, let each of you look not only to his own interests, but to the interests of others. In 1 Thessalonians, we read, we urge you, admonish those who are sitting on their hands, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, be patient with them all. There is this picture of shared load, shared burden, shared support, lifting one another up and giving strength to one another. Who in your life shares the load? And you may be in this room and say, you know what? I don't have anybody like that. I was talking to my wife after the first service, and she said, I've spent a lot of my life wrestling with this idea. And I hear a lot of people in life wrestling with that statement of like, nobody really knows. I really have no one. And she said, but the older I get, the more I realize the people that God has given me around me that I just need to look to. They are a someone who God has pulled up alongside of me. This past week I came home and my wife was on a phone call with one of her someones, a friend that has never left, but she does not live here. She's moved away, we've moved away, but she has been with Jenna, in it with Jenna through thick and thin, through grief and loss. They have supported each other, celebrate each other. They navigated like having babies at the same time and crying with each other and navigating change and moving honestly. She has had a someone in her life, someone that has strengthened faith for her, spoken up for her, and also tells her the truth when she needs to hear it. Needs to say, hey, Jenna, you're not thinking about this clearly. Or have you thought about it this way? Moses had that too. Moses had someone to speak the truth. There's this time in Moses' life where he's become this great leader. He's walked his whole nation into the desert, and he's doing everything. He's seen as this guy. Aaron's also got his own responsibilities. He's like instituting worship and this Levitical practice, and Moses is just burning the candle at both ends, and he's pretty tired. And then his father-in-law comes to town. And he says this, when his father-in-law saw all that Moses was doing for the people, he said, what is this you are doing for everyone? Why do you alone sit as judge, while all these people around you are standing around you from morning till evening? And Moses answered him, because the people come to me to seek God's will. Whenever they have a dispute, it's brought to me. I decide between the parties and tell them, this is what God says. Moses' father-in-law replied, what you are doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy. You cannot handle it alone. Remember Moses' story. Moses kind of starts this whole story, this whole journey of identity and purpose feeling alone. Send somebody else. He's wrestling with loneliness and insecurity and all these things. Then God has brought some someones into his life. Now he's actually seen the work of God, seen a whole nation released from slavery, walking through and now he's in a position of leadership. And he says, you can't do that alone. Why do you, that question he asks is haunting. Why do you sit alone? Some of you know the loneliness of success. Some of you know the loneliness of leadership. You maybe started a company or a business, or you're the CEO or you're the CFO, or you're like in a position of leadership even in your family, or and you know like that you can tell yourself like nobody else knows and nobody else can do what I can do. And so Moses finds himself in a position where leadership is actually really crippling and lonely for him. And he has a father-in-law. What's your relationship with your father-in-law like? Who comes to him and he tells him the truth. And he says, look around you. All these people are standing, you have all these someones around you. And you're saying, they come to me. Probably a pride check for Moses to say, why do you sit alone? You can't handle it alone. You're going to burn yourself out. You're going to burn everybody else out around you. Why don't you ask for some help? Why don't you delegate? Why don't you see the someones that God has given you around you? He says, listen now to me, and I will give you some advice, Moses, the leader of all these people. And may God be with you. Select capable men from all the people. Have them serve. That will make your load lighter, because they will share it with you. If you do this, and so God commands, you will be able to stand the weight, stand the strain, and all these people will go home satisfied. Moses had someone in his life to speak a hard truth. Someone to speak truth to him, wisdom and blessing, someone to share the load, someone to be with, somebody to strengthen faith, and then someone to speak the truth, to actually challenge him. We are in a time where we can easily find ourselves in these echo chambers of trying to navigate life and faith and raising a family and managing and just surrounding ourselves with people who just tell us what we want to hear. I'm going to go to the people that they're going to tell me what I want to hear, not what I need to hear. Who has permission to just tell you the truth? Who do you go to for some truth telling? Are you that for somebody else? And there's someone in Moses' life that just speaks the truth. I'll never forget meeting with a member of our leadership team here at SLO City. If you don't know, we've got a kind of a board of leadership team, management team at the church. And a few years back, we're sitting down. He's become a friend. And we're sitting down, and he said, I'm just going to level with you right here. He's like, I love what's happening in the life of our church. I love the direction of our church, and I love everything about our church, and the nomadic seasons of being at Mission Prep, and then online, and then in a parking lot, and then at the high school, and then at Broad Street, and now here by the messages and worship, and I'm all about SLO City under your leadership and stewardship. But if you ever, and then he takes his tone, like, here we go. But if you ever prioritize your work or your ministry to the church over your relationship with your wife, your kids, I'm out. I was like, yeah, I need somebody to say that to me. We need people to say hard things to us. Thank God he's still attending and a part of the leadership team here today, right? And even though I am not a perfect husband and I am not a perfect dad and I fail at all of those things miserably, he has been a person in my life that says, challenged me, pointed out when I'm running too hard, pointed out when I am just spoken the truth. Do you have somebody like that in your life? Do you welcome that someone into your life? Or do you push it away? that question that Jethro asks Moses is so powerful, and it cuts to me. He says, "Why do you sit alone, Moses?" See, some of us, we have some someones that we might be sitting around, and yet we just kind of wall up, and I get it, and I know why. Because we've had people hurt us. We've trusted people. We've had people walk away. We've had people move away. We've gone through all the things, and we're just like, how much more can I take of this? And yet God is going, I'm trying to mold you and shape you into who I see you to be. And I've put some someones in your life. Would you see them? You need somebody in your corner. You need a hype man that gives you like a mantra. You float like a butterfly and you sting like a bee. You need a trainer that shows you how to take some punches and deliver some punches and duck, dip, dive. That's dodgeball. You need some people in your corner that are working out some of the details from it. You need a cut man. You need a cut man that, like, when your eyebrow splits open because of something, when you are bloodied and beaten and broken, to stitch you back together and stand you up. You need somebody who says, hey, you need to take a break, or you need to fold it in the towel, or you need to keep swinging. You need somebody in your corner. Who is in your corner? We see on Moses' journey to discover identity, purpose, calling, leadership, connection to God, his strength was faith. He needed someone in his life who spoke wisdom and blessing and strength and support, who shared the load. All of those someones made Moses who he was. Who are your someones? Who can you be a someone for? A couple of practical steps for us. Number one, these are not going to be revolutionary. See a someone around you. There may be someone that God has put in your path that you have walled yourself up to. Would you let down the walls? Would you put your guard down? And would you let them support you? Would you let them listen? Would you be a listening ear for them? Who's around you? Who has God put in your life? Number two, and this sounds self-serving. I promise you it's not. But join a team. Maybe at church or somewhere else. Join a serve team at church, and like some of the coolest relationships that I see established are people who are serving together, putting donuts together. Somebody came up to me and said, hey, somebody's kind of lost a job this week, and would you pray with us after service? They know what's going on in each other's life because they're in it together. They're serving together. So maybe that's an easy step for you. Join a team. If you feel alone, like there's no one, there's a someone for you. Third, maybe attend an event. Revolutionary point. Write that down, tweet that if you don't mind. Attend an event. You know, we put on together nights. Last Tuesday night, we had 125 people in this room around circle tables, eating Old Slow barbecue, and new connections were made. Faith was stirred up. There was like a reliance on one another and a shared experience together. And that happens by showing up, by gathering. I love that we get to do this on Sunday morning, but we are all seated the same direction, facing this. And God puts us together in circles and in different places because he wants to spur on relationship and community. Number 4 is host or join a group. We're starting a Groups at Home series that's going to be super laid back in February. You can host a group in your home. You don't have to be all put together. We'll help you with questions and resources so that you can grab your someones and sit around and eat good food and sit on a couch together and share life together and pray together and laugh together. God gives us one another. Jesus said, love one another as I have loved you. The world is going to know that you're my disciples by the way you love one another, by the way that you share the load together. So who are your someones? And would you be a someone to someone else? Would you stand with me? We'll pray and wrap up this morning singing this last song together. And I'm going to risk something here, and you don't have to participate. But if you know the people sitting next to you, or if you feel comfortable doing this with a stranger, maybe look eyes, maybe put your hand on the shoulder of the person next to you, or grab the hand of somebody next to you. Unless it's weird, like look at them and be like, is this too weird? It might be weird and it's okay. Don't do it if it's weird, all right? I just want to say life is lonely. Life is hard. And God gives us the church to be in this together, not to do life alone. He gives us one another. And so if this is a picture you need today, I pray that you see it. If you came here by yourself, man, don't stay there. Like, reach out, connect. We're looking for you. We want to be in this together. God gives us the church. Let's pray. God, we love you and we thank you for the person standing next to us. We thank you for the opportunity that we have to know you, God, and to be known by you. And we thank you, God, that how you instituted life in the church is that you gave us one another. You sent help in the form of another person, another friend, another mentor, a someone to be a someone for us. And so, God, would you help us not to wall up against that, but would you help us to extend a hand towards that. Thank you for Jesus, who modeled relationships, who modeled friendship, who modeled what it was like to trust and risk and be vulnerable, even to the point where he was hurt by his own vulnerability. And he said, this is worth it. This is worth it. And so, God, would you help us just to respond to your heart? Thank you, Jesus, for the cross, that we can know one another and that you establish the church. We worship you now. It's in the powerful name of Jesus that we pray.